What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new Lightshare Academy. It's been a couple months since the last episode, but I'm here today with Andre, and in today's topic, we're going to be tackling one of the most important fundamentals for image making, and that is composition. So, with that being said, let's jump into it. All right. So, today we're going to talk about composition and what is composition, first of all. So, composition is basically the arrangement of elements in a work of art. In the visual arts, composition is the organization of elements in a work of art, such as painting, sculpture, or photography. The artist arranges the elements to create a relationship that they and the viewer find satisfactory. So here I have like a couple of examples of composition. I think this is from Edgar Payne. These are like some small composition thumbnails he did for like paint stuff. And the thing about composition to note is that you can approach composition in any way. It's good to study the main rules first, and then later on you can break these rules to, do whatever kind of composition you want. Same thing with style. At first you have to like learn the basics, and then you can break style however you want to. So it's the same thing as composition. So these are like some of his examples. You have like scales right here, a circular composition. S curve is pretty common in like environments and stuff. Cross, radiating line, rectangular. These are pretty good for like static compositions. You're just looking at like an establishing shot. These are great for those. And then we move on to some of the more common composition examples, some that we use like mostly in everyday art that we see. Here's a triangular composition. Maybe this is like good for action shots, if it's like a cinematic painting or something, or just like a calm shot like this. Then you have your golden ratio, which has like this sweeping curve that goes to the focal point right here. I think this is pretty common in photography too, but you can also do this in art. And then rule of thirds, this is like what pretty much everyone uses in art. Probably the most simple and basic one, and I think it works for like any occasion. So what are some of the best ways to learn composition? For me personally, when I start out composition practice, I love to reference cinematography, right? Cinematography, I think, is one of the best ways to learn composition because it's each frame has like a singular shot of what the focal point is in each segment. So if you take a look at each frame from a thumbnail view, you could clearly see what action is happening within each frame without zooming into all the details. So let me just take this in actually take
So, Dom, while you are getting it ready, you mentioned like the rules and then the way that you like to study. But would you would some of the first steps when you are studying a composition try to fit the specific frame that you are looking at into one of those rules, like trying to understand which scheme the person is using? Is that one of the approaches that you would use?
That's a good question. Typically, if I'm looking at a composition, I'm just seeing if the flow is there, right? So I'm not worrying too much about which type to use at first. I'm just seeing like how the elements can work in tandem with each other. A composition is basically just the rearrangement of elements to make the flow cohesive within the frame. Right? It guides the viewer's eye in a way that's enticing or relaxing. There's just like this smooth gesture around the frame. So I'm just going to break down these frames real quick. We can see immediately this one kind of uses like a rule of thirds composition. So it falls nicely on this pattern here, where we can see the focal point in here. There's another focal point here. This is like this perfect establishing shot for two different people in the frame. This one is also another rule of thirds kind of thing. We have the subject matter. This side, it's taking up most of the space on the right side of the screen. And then we have another large object, this square here. This also provides good framing for this focal point. The person in the newspaper, that's also a focal point. This one, you have kind of like a radiating composition, as we saw before. It's shutting out. But you see how I can use different elements within the environment to guide our eye towards the center of the frame, like these sidewalks here, and also the direction of these windows. They're going towards the center of the frame, and also this car motion. So this is like that central radiating composition. And then this one, you kind of have like a golden ratio thing going on as well, where you could start with the rule of thirds again. And you see how like this kind of lands on that rule of third here. It doesn't have to land exactly on the rule of third, but if it's kind of close to it, that's also good enough. See, he's not directly on it, but he's close to that shot. And then
Yeah,
you
it's
also have like,
also
go ahead.
no, it's also interesting how the main subject of each shot, so like the newspaper on the second one, or the guy choking the other one on the last one, it's taking so much more space than any other element in the frame, because
Right.
it is also a contrast of the main element on the cars scene, where I'm assuming the main subject is the guy like doing something on that second car. Maybe he's talking to someone or something, and then it takes like very little space on the screen space itself, but also it's reinforced the attention that we should give to this very minor thing on screen by how much everything is pointing to it. So
Yeah.
the director in that case is also aware of what to push on each one, given the amount of space that the thing that he wants you to look at is taken on screen with. So
You can pretty much do however you want to approach the composition, but essentially you want like all the elements working together in tandem. Really wrapping up the last one real quick, you can see how these two guys here are looking at this main subject matter. So the person's emotion and the eyes in their face can really drive the composition forward as well. And then we have like this sort of sweeping motion going up. So that's kind of like that rule of thirds ratio, or no, sorry, golden ratio thing. You know, so it drives all the attention to that right side of the frame. And then these are like some of the supporting elements that kind of reinforce that.
even the vertical elements, right? They give a nice framing to the main subject, because we have that the vertical element on the right hand side of the character that's kind of framing the right hand side of the screen, and then the two columns there are also framing the left side. So you get almost a small composition within those, like within the composition itself, as if the center of your focus should be like between the first column and the cylindrical object there, and then you have also like the extended composition.
Yeah, it you can use like any of these types of elements within the scene to support those compositional elements. Like even these shelves here in the background, it points to this guy right here. Yeah, even like these lines, these are directional lines as well, pointing to this guy. So just anything that you see in the shot that can frame the focal point. All right, we'll take a look at one more. So let's look at this one,
That one is beautiful, man.
the lighting. Okay. So this one is the same principle. You could use lighting to direct your composition as well. Um, go back to the rule of thirds. So as we can see here, the person doesn't exactly land on the rule of thirds. Actually, let me pull up the crop tool. Yeah, so it doesn't exactly land on these focal points. However, it doesn't really matter too much because this is one of the brightest parts of the image. Like we can look directly at that spot. So this is how you can use lighting to your advantage, where the brightest spots in the image are typically where the focal point lies. And you're also looking at here. This lands on the rule of thirds. Um, this also, another cool thing you can do is break up the rule of thirds into many different segments as well. So, you could split this side up into other quadrants, and you can have a focal point right here, or maybe you split this right here, you can have another right here. So these are just like very mini small focal points where you could pull one right here or right here. Um, so you can do a whole bunch of things with it. And in terms of the elements, you can see how this staircase kind of guides our eye towards the focal point here. So it's like this huge sweeping motion going this way. Has like a nice gesture, nice
Yeah.
flow.
You also have
Uh,
the handrail there, like it's forming one diagonal, and then the wall right next to the girl is
yeah,
like supporting the other one, so kind of form a cross, like an X towards her, like where
right.
both of those lines kind of cross, which is
Yeah,
like extremely powerful. And
yeah.
then
This
I'm not sure
handrail
if
here.
this is a movie. Yeah, like all of them are kind of crossing at her. And
Mhm.
then I'm not sure if it's a movie or a painting because it does look a little bit CG, but the use of the even if it's a movie, they only use the bloom effect on the girl itself, like they are surrounding her. So even though we have like a super bright area in the foreground there, it doesn't feel as bright as the steps that she's stepping on or her hair, because you don't get
Right.
that huge impact on the surrounding area of that light shining on everything. So
Right. Yeah, and you'll notice how like everything else is darker in the background. So it takes the attention off like all of these surrounding elements, and it still puts the focus back on her. So you can vignette certain areas within the composition and really drive that focus into like what your main focal point is. You can have multiple different ones, but you need to make sure that your main one still has that focus so it doesn't get too distracting. We'll go into like uh, some examples of not so good composition in a bit. But yeah, that's that one. Okay. So cinematography is one of your best guidances to learning composition. Just take each example, break them apart. Like I could quickly break this down real quick. You can see how this dog, for example, has this sweeping motion towards the girl here. that's like an example composition. She also lands on the rule of thirds. I could have just done this. But yeah. But you can see how even like this person's leg here is also pointing towards her. And this chair here is pointing towards her. And you can also see that the table frame is kind of framing her a bit. So all of these elements are directed at this girl here. And so all these, supporting elements kind of drive that focal point. Here, we have two different hands. You can do that rule of thirds thing again. Automatically lands on these focal points. So these are like the main points that you'll look at. This bouquet here in the back, it kind of frames that cigarette. So it creates that really nice focal point there. And then the background is kind of pushed back in space. There's some lights here, but it's not as detracting from the main focal point because these are like the biggest elements that we see. So that, and then we'll do one more. Let's do this one. This one is also a good example of having like this really big focal point right here, and then it kind of radiates out from this point. So we have like that perspective composition again. And then this guy, obviously, he lands on the rule of thirds right here. So he's like the main focus. And then you have all these other supporting elements, the background here, the awnings kind of pointing at him, this car here. So in like your own illustration, just use like whatever you have in the environment that you can use to direct it back towards your focal point. You don't have to make it like super obvious that like, hey, this is the focal point, but making it subtle is always like a good thing to do, so it doesn't come off as like you're trying to get the attention right there. But all these supporting elements do help, like in a yeah, in a less
Yeah,
demanding way.
it's almost as if like it's a bunch of subtle hints instead of like
Yeah.
being extremely obvious.
Yeah, like you don't have to put a giant red arrow right there,
Oh man,
pointing right at him.
but
It's like
I
too
want to
obvious.
put every character on like a neon kind of sign. Stuff.
Here's like some examples of artist reference. This is like Frank Frazetta. Highly recommend to study his stuff. He kind of uses a lot of the same compositions. Like a triangular composition is his main go-to. You can see that a lot throughout most of his stuff. But it's pretty simple and it works, right? He's not like really trying to reinvent the wheel. He's just using like a simple basic composition that already gets your attention from
Mhm.
the
He's also
first time you
using
see it.
a lot of like light and values to guide his
Yeah,
compositions. Like he has very strong shadows, very
that
very
too.
distinctive, and like you can see the head of every character there. Like it's basically outlined in terms of value, like a lot of contrast. So
Mhm. Yeah, he pushes that contrast like really heavy. So it pops out. Like he has these light values here and then dark values. So it creates like that punchy effect. This I like has a nice sweeping motion, like a J. I think it's kind of like a vertical uh, golden ratio in a way, where it's
yeah,
kind of like that. So the rule of thirds is like a vertical comp. but you can see it still lands in this quadrant. You got the mountain up here in this kind of range, and there's nothing here. You don't have to fill out all the quadrants as long as at least two of the quadrants are filled up. Then it's fine. So, what are some best books to study composition from? I would recommend this book. This is like the Bible of
Yeah.
composition.
That book literally changed the way that I see composition. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, and I only got my hands on it, I think, this year, like earlier this year, and I wish I would have done it earlier.
it's super helpful for beginner artists, professional artists. Like you can learn a ton from this. Uh, Framed Ink by Marcus Mistray or Mateo. He basically breaks down everything in black and white, like traditional ink, but he uses digital. But yeah, he breaks down different types of perspective compositional elements. Uh, Pretty easy to understand as opposed to like looking at photograph for the first time. I think he like really knows how to break down these shapes in order for you to digest it easily. So yeah, go check out this book. Even like does little silhouette thumbnails so you can see how the shapes interact with each other. Super helpful. And he goes more in depth into like yeah, breaking down these forms, showing how like different elements sweep throughout the scene, more calm elements as well. So yeah. So let's take a look at some bad compositions. Here's my old artwork from like 12 years ago.
Oh, dang. Spiky
Yeah,
mountains. Spiky alien mountains. That's so rare.
yeah. So off the bat, we can see that I tried to do like a rule of thirds type of thing, but the thing we need to keep in mind about composition is that we want to make sure that elements aren't the same size. So we want to vary up the elements as well. Like, these uh, houses right here are kind of the same size as this mountain. And so, in order to make that um, illusion of scale and stuff, you have to make sure you vary up the sizes of elements within the scene. So, like, this could have been smaller, I felt, or maybe it's something completely different. And, there's not really anything interesting that's happening right here. So I kind of missed that chance for like compositional element. This guy landed on the rule of thirds, but like it's still not really like a good focal point to look at. Um, yeah, right here, this is kind of like a obscure shape, so it's not really clear to the audience what that is. You have to make sure like your elements are readable in the scene. Make sure your silhouettes are sharp. And then this one as well, you have like these rocks here kind of going into space somewhere. It's not like doesn't make sense where these rocks are going to. They're kind of just going up in like different directions, but it's not actually like centering in on the main focal point, which could have been this, but like I had some you know, sweeping directions going off into the distance somewhere. So it's things like this you kind of have to watch out
It's
for.
it's funny because if you had like if all of the rocks were extremely diagonal and then you had that one vertical shape right down like the center, that would make it for like a better um, design of a scene overall.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like I
but
could have
yeah,
maybe gotten rid of all these and then somehow directed like this thing straight
or
onto
or,
the city.
or maybe even like because if you make all of them like that same angle, right, and you just imply that the landscape's formed is formed by those, then they become less important. And then like the one thing sticking out would be the central element. that would make more
Yeah.
sense. But it's the inconsistency, right? So like you have some that are pointing towards the right, some towards the left, some like pointing upwards, and then you have the circular thing that is not quite working. So
Yeah. Eventually, you build these observations over time
mm,
just by looking at, how things flow together. Like, another good way to practice is just going outside, taking your camera out, and you can put like the rule of thirds frame thing on your camera, and you can like put objects on the thirds to make sure it lines up and stuff, and then, make cool compositions that way and study from them. But yeah, let's check out some better compositions. Stuff from our work. So this is Andre's ship. Even though it's like a design, it's not like an environment. It still has like good compositional elements like flow, gesture, the form. See how right here already it has like a focal point on the left side of the canvas. Got something, right here to look at, and this sort of shape here kind of sweeps in to this focal point as well as like this curvature. So it draws our eye to like this part of the frame right here.
yeah,
And then we have this tail
it's
and goes
funny,
here as
like
well.
because despite the fact that it is a ship, right? One of the things that I did was like fiddle a lot with the camera angle for the like final screenshot that I took, just to make
Right.
sure that oh the angles of everything coincidentally pointed towards where the composition would be nice.
Yeah,
Um,
like sometimes you'll not think about it at first until once you finish the piece, it finally like works, right? Like it all comes together. And that's just like developing that instinct over time, just drawing and drawing and drawing until it's like, oh, I finally see something that's not really flowing as well as before, right? And it's
yeah, like
already
even
there
on
in the
that one,
final.
like the little
Yeah.
X right on the nose of the ship, like that's not quite working in terms of design, right? But well,
I mean, it still kind of like frames this part, I feel,
yeah, I
like
think
a
the bottom
triangle.
part could have been like up to the nose,
Yeah.
like covering that a little
Um,
bit more.
yeah, it's all still like subjective, right? You can again take it any way you want. Um, but yeah, it's just about finding that flow, that gesture for the eye to kind of read well. And then we got Adrian's avatar landscape here.
The beast.
And his works very well too. You go to the rule of thirds. You can see how like there's stuff that we can see in this part, like these rocks here. Um, the character on the side here. If we split this up into its own quadrant, kind of lands in that region, a little bit over to the far right. But our main focus is mostly, this big boy right here. So this is like what I see at first glance. And then, like this waterfall here and the guy here is kind of supporting the the mountain in the distance. So that's probably like the last thing I'll see. But this right here is where my eye will go to.
Yeah,
And
if you
then
also notice like the fact that he kind of hides like a third of his composition, if you take the two thirds that is left, right? So the right ones, and then you break that down into the rule of thirds, they do kind of land on that main mountain that we're looking at.
this one,
Yeah, because
yeah.
that is the like highest point of contrast and where like you assume that the character will eventually get to. So the character is almost a like you mentioned, right? The second thing you notice or the third thing you notice because you are like in awe of the landscape. They're like, oh hey, there's a little dude here that is doing something.
So yeah, it's just about picking that first uh, establishing shot focal point that you want your viewer to see, and then you could put other secondary details to, they're almost like Easter eggs, right? You're just scanning through the image to see what else there is. And then I did this interior environment where I made sure like this was landing on the rule of thirds, like this area. And then you have like kind of the statues, the hierarchy of the statues going towards the center. So we see like this uh, temple wall here. And then I had like another character in this quadrant for the main character to kind of see like where he's going. And then the light, I used a little bit of the light to focus in on this guy. And then some supporting lights up here to highlight some of these statues. So I had like a tertiary focal point. And then I used like some of these light lines to draw the attention here, maybe some of these as well. And also like the perspective of the ground plane to direct it towards this. So
Even how the light is hitting those stones on the ground, like those are very bright, you know. And then you're
I did, yeah, I didn't notice that. I
like
could
those,
have dimmed these lights a bit, but
but
yeah,
the other ones, like on the very center, that are like on the ground and then on a little rock, they're pointing towards the other character.
this one or
Yeah, yeah, those triangular ones. Like it's almost like an arrow, you know, towards the character. Like, hey,
uh,
check this out.
yeah. So these are just some ways you can practice it in your own pieces. Just like experiment, try to find what kind of works in the flow of the gesture and stuff. And it's not gonna happen overnight, like the composition sense. You'll have to like develop it through tons of drawings, tons of paintings until it makes sense. One of the best ways to uh, paint or draw a composition is by painting it from like a very far view, right? If you paint like really close or something, you won't be able to catch like the whole composition that you're looking for because everything's all zoomed in. So make sure you zoom out and try to design from like a far perspective so you can see all the elements within the frame first. And then as you go deeper into your piece, you can zoom in more and more and then detail the elements as you go. And then when you look out, you can see, okay, the composition is still intact. It's not you know, it's not too bad from the beginning, right? And I believe that's it. That's composition 101 for you guys.
You asked for it, so we brought Lightshare Academy back.
Yeah. If you guys have any other topics you want us to explore or like any other sub categories of these different fundamentals, please leave them down in the comment section below. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this Lightshare Academy episode, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Cheers.
See you guys.